What's good, party people? This is Coordinator Woods, and I have the honor and privilege of talking to my friend. He is the former major domo of WCW, had runs in TNA and a WWE Hall of Famer, in addition to being a impresario in the business world. He's the one, the only, Eric Bischoff. Eric, what's going on?
Well, I'm going to tell you something right now, buddy. I loved your open. That's a hell of a cool open you got.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I try to work hard in it, kind of get something attention getting. I mean, learning from the great Steve Kaufman. You kind of want to have some sizzle to the steak.
Well, you got plenty of sizzle and plenty of steak. So there you go.
Appreciate it. And Rocky Nelson already dropping on. Hell yeah. Hell yes. But Eric, obviously, you've been basically asked a lot of WCW, a lot of WWE questions, but you got your start in the AWA with Vern Gagne, which I really want to get into. And I feel like the AWA gets lost, right? When they're doing like NWA kind of resets and WCW and ECW reunion shows, like AWA kind of gets lost in the ether. But what were your initial memories of AWA?
Well, really, it dates back to when my parents, I was about 14 or 15. I don't remember anymore. But when I was very young, my parents moved from Pittsburgh to Minneapolis. My dad got a job offer there. So he picked up the family and moved us to Minnesota. And Minnesota AWA was the prominent regional territory in Minnesota, the Dakotas, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa. Part of their territory was also Denver and, for whatever reason, San Francisco and Las Vegas, but primarily the Midwest. So when I moved from Pittsburgh to Minnesota, my first friend was professional wrestling. So it kind of traveled with me, and I found the AWA and kind of continued my fandom, if you will, for professional wrestling with the AWA. That's my first memory of it.
And in Pittsburgh, did you get any of the pro wrestling? Because obviously the Northeast, Bruno Sammartino, I would assume, right?
Right, yeah. I moved from Detroit. I was born in Detroit. I left Detroit when I was about 12 or 13 and moved to Pittsburgh. So when I was in Detroit, I used to watch, it was called Big Time Wrestling on CKLW. It was out of Windsor, Canada, right across the river from Detroit. And that's when I was really young. My brother and I would get up, on Saturday mornings. My mom, we only had one car in my family, and my dad worked on Saturdays. So my mom would drive my dad to work. And then while my dad was working, my mom would do the grocery shopping for the week, which left my little brother and I home alone. And we commandeered the television, and, we'd watch our morning cartoons. And by about 10 or 11 in the morning, after cartoons were over, that's when Big Time Wrestling came on. It was like the Sheik and Dick the Bruiser, Bobo Brazil, Crusher. Those are some of the names I remember as a kid. And then when I moved to Pittsburgh, I can't remember what the name of the show was in Pittsburgh, but it was the Pittsburgh, the regional territory in Pittsburgh, and it was Bruno Sammartino. And I started watching that until we moved to Minnesota, and then started watching Vern Gagne in the AWA.
And there's a difference in terms of the style of wrestling. Bruno, kind of the powerhouse and strong ethnic fan base in the Northeast, but and then AWA and Vern Gagne, I mean, that's a pretty straight wrestling style, athletic acumen. So I mean, did you have a difference in following one product to the other?
No, because Bruno Sammartino was like the legitimate blue collar, hardworking, Italian heritage guy, a blue collar guy, right? But he was still a very physical, very traditional, kind of no nonsense wrestler. And Vern Gagne came from a really strong amateur background. I think. I don't remember his titles, but I think he was an NCAA wrestling champion.
Yes,
in college, and then he was actually drafted by the Green Bay Packers, I believe.
Right.
And then I think he went into the service and came out, and then got into professional wrestling. But Vern's, because his background was legitimate amateur wrestling, Vern's approach to professional wrestling was very legitimate, kind of on the technical side. Vern thought a lot of guys like Billy Robinson. Billy was from the UK and very much a technical wrestler. He was kind of like the predecessor of Steven Regal.
Yes.
That fans today would know, but very legitimate, man of 1,000 holds type of guy. Nick Bockwinkel, who was also a very, 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 very much a technical style of wrestler, big character. But Vern also had some over the top character wrestlers like Mad Dog Vachon and Baron von Raschke and Ivan Putski, and he had his colorful kind of over the top characters, as well as kind of guys who came from a more traditional athletic background.
No, 100%. And it's funny that you mentioned Billy Robinson. I'm a huge Billy Robinson fan. When I kind of go to sleep, I watch the YouTube compilation of a wrestler's wrestler, and that kind of eases me. It's people getting dumped on their head. That eases me. There might be something wrong, but yeah, well, I digress, right?
No, Billy was fun to watch, as was Nick Bockwinkel. But
yes,
Billy and Vern, I like that style of wrestling, and it probably still to this day. Again, we become fans of what made us fans early on in our fandom, our childhood, whatever it is we started watching wrestling. And that style of wrestling still, it's probably one of the reasons why I love watching guys like Dean Malenko.
Yes.
Whenever Conrad and I review a show at Nitro, I always look forward to watching old Dean Malenko matches, because Dean was very similar to Billy Robinson and Vern. Billy used a lot of submission holds. He was what they call the catch-as-catch-can style wrestler from the UK. Dean was more of a combination style wrestler, but still very, very athletic and very believable. They used to call it scientific wrestling, is what they called it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still a fan of that to this day.
No, as am I. And I just drove back last night from Riverside, where I saw a Billy Robinson pupil in former IWGP and UFC heavyweight champion Josh Barnett make his return to New Japan after 17 years. So yeah, catch as catch can is fresh on the brain. Now, in terms of who your favorite wrestlers are, either now or back in the day, Yasbeats wants to know who are your favorite wrestlers, either now or from back in the day? I know that question is subjective to what you're watching right now, but like as of right now, who are your favorites or favorites of the past?
There's several. When I look back, I still think Nick Bockwinkel is always going to be at the top of the list of my favorites, not only because of what he was capable of in ring as a performer. He was just magnificent, fluid, flawless. His timing was perfect. His character was so strong. But if you go back and look at some of Nick Bockwinkel's promos, they hold up to this day. He was so good. He had that arrogant kind of better than everybody kind of an attitude, but he was so articulate and did it in such a way. He never yelled. He never got angry. He never showed a lot of emotion, but he was so fluid and articulate that half the times he would use words I didn't even understand, but he'd still piss me off, But I loved watching him, man. I just loved watching him. Kurt Hennig, early Kurt Hennig. If you go back and watch some of Kurt's early matches, in fact, if you go back and watch some of Kurt Hennig's early matches when he was still kind of green with Nick Bockwinkel, still to this day, some of the best matches. Again, subjective, and a lot of it has to do with the impression it made on me at that stage of my life, but I haven't lost it yet. I still think to this day it's some of the best action in the ring that I can remember seeing.
I agree. And I remember being, a pretty big Ric Flair fan as I was coming up, but until I basically had ESPN Classics and saw a lot of the AWA stuff that I had been missing in my kind of wrestling kind of knowledge and what have you. And, Ric Flair, if you're going with the 80s type, I don't know, like millionaire type deal, right? He was very much Wolf of Wall Street, like but Nick Bockwinkel was more who you would see on Robin Leach's Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, talking about my skill, my cunning, which is really fun because like his dad Warren, I mean, they were a Texas-based family. Nick is a second-generation wrestler. For him to kind of almost anti-Texan in terms of his presentation when he laces up his boots, it's just kind of fun.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back and read a little bit about Nick Bockwinkel, Nick was initially trained by his father Warren, because Nick was kind of getting pushed around and bullied in high school, and went to his dad one day and said, "Dad, I mean, Nick was a big kid even in high school. I think he weighed about 190 pounds or so, but." Went to his dad and said, "Hey, this," and there was a guy bigger than Nick, kind of bullying him around. And Nick went to his dad and said, "Hey, can you teach me something to get this cat off my back?" And Warren took his son under his wing. And then I think it was Lord James Blears was a friend of Warren Bockwinkel's. And after Nick trained a little bit with his dad, trained with Lord Blears, and started at a very early age. You look at Nick's, pedigree. I think he was probably one of the more well-traveled. He worked in Hawaii, worked in Japan at a very young age, worked in California, worked up in the Pacific Northwest with Don Owen, worked in Texas, worked in, Georgia Championship Wrestling, worked in Florida, and that was long before he even got to the AWA. And amazing resume, that Nick had. And then he got to AWA, I think about 1970, and pretty much finished up his career there. And I think he retired in 1987.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, it's funny because he retires in 87, but, right around that time, another Lord, of people of a certain age comes into play in Lord Alfred Hayes, the former Judo Al Hayes, in World of Sport. So again, it's one of those things that kind of it's lost in generation. So I love the fact that you're bringing it up. Yeah, it's just, and there isn't too much footage on Lord James Blears, which is a travesty.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to go back and see some early Nick Bockwinkel matches. I've seen photographs. I've only seen one photograph of his father Warren, and it was an old, not a very good photograph, but I've seen a couple, pictures of young, very, very, very young Nick Bockwinkel as he was breaking into the business. But I would love to see some early footage, predating AWA of Nick to kind of compare where he was in his early career to, the finesse, experienced Nick Bockwinkel that I was first introduced to as a teenager.
No, 100%, 100%. Julian Smith says, so great to see Uncle Eric in the woods, one of the greatest minds in the wrestling business. See, there you go.
That's why I love doing this stuff, because people put me over.
Yeah.
Otherwise, once I get done doing this, I just get the shit kicked out of me everywhere I go.
Well, not here at all. This is a safe space. Which, speaking of spaces, right? You mentioned, Don Owens, in the Pacific Northwest. Rocky Nelson says, when I was young, we had a lot of Pacific Northwest wrestlers go to the AWA. So my childhood was Don Owens, Pacific Northwest Wrestling, and AWA. I always liked you back then too, your AWA run.
Yeah, and I never really saw much out of the Pacific Northwest. I've still to this day have not seen a lot of footage from that era, but I know Don Owen and Vern Gagne had a very good working relationship. So that's why a lot of talent that came out of Minnesota ended up, in the Pacific Northwest for Don and vice versa. And by the way, speaking of, you mentioned Ric Flair. Ric Flair was trained by Vern Gagne.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people don't realize that. But, Rick, when he was at the University of Minnesota, I think he played football for a minute at the University of Minnesota, and then ended up training with Vern Gagne. So there's a lot of Vern's influence, at least initially, in Ric Flair.
Absolutely. And you mentioned, Rick's stint in college at University of Minnesota. Funny enough, he ends up rooming with one, if not both, of Bill Goldberg's older brothers.
I did not know that.
Yeah. So it's just
Fascinating.
it is, small world, small world. That's what I love about combat sports. Usually they say 6 degrees of separation. Really, in this, between the ropes in the cage type deal, you can probably get it between 2 and 4.
I was just going to say about 2.5. It's
Yeah.
about right.
And McMack says, Eric,
Hey,
why?
McMahon, how the hell are you?
Yes, he said, why are you so cool?
Oh, I don't know. I guess cool is in the eye of the beholder.
I will behold you to be one of the coolest cats on the block. So there you go. And Vince Moore says, "Good to see two students of wrestling of the wrestling game talking about it." Mr. Bischoff, thank you so very much for your efforts to promote wrestling. And Adam Rumble, Young Man Rumble, appreciate that, Vince.
So, and the Rumble, Young Man Rumble, that's one of my favorite. Muhammad Ali. I just saw that the other day out because I'm a big Muhammad Ali fan. Can't see it up. I got a big picture of Muhammad Ali up there. I had him sign. But that was, I don't know if you remember seeing that. I think he was in the ring with his trainer right before a fight. And they kind of worked together, and it's Rumble, Young Man Rumble. And there was something else they tagged it with at the end. I can't remember it right this second, but that's where that came from. I love that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Ali. Before I kind of want to ask about Ali, but Rocky Nelson says Nick Bockwinkel versus Rip Oliver were some of the best matches I've ever seen. Which, if you've got links, Rocky, send them our way.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I'm not familiar with Rip Oliver, so that would be I would love to see that.
Oh, for Don Owen, I think pre Roddy Piper, I mean Rip Oliver was kind of the top draw in that territory.
Very cool.
Yeah. In terms of where you got that photo signed, was it in person and was it in North Korea?
No, it was when I got back, and I don't remember where we were. Honestly, I don't remember where we were because it came to me in the mail.
Okay.
But I got to know. I worked with Muhammad in I think '94 was the first time I got to work with Muhammad Ali, and then went to North Korea with Muhammad, and that was still to this day when I think of kind of like the highlight reel of my life in professional wrestling. I got to hang with Muhammad Ali for like 5 straight days. I sat next to Muhammad on a plane from Tokyo to Pyongyang, North Korea. And we sat next to each other on a plane. And Muhammad Ali told me where he came up with the character, when he was Cassius Clay and the loud, he based his character, and he said, this is what Muhammad told me. He based that persona, he didn't say character, but he based that persona on Gorgeous George. Because as a kid, he used to go to watch professional wrestling in Louisville, and Gorgeous George was a big thing. And he saw that flamboyant, kind of cocky, just riling people up. And to have Muhammad Ali tell me that story, just one-on-one in a plane. And, Muhammad, back then in 95, obviously because of Parkinson's, he had a hard time communicating.
Right.
So when he tried to speak loud enough for people to hear, he really struggled. But he could whisper. Wow. When he whispered, you could actually understand him really easily. But as he tried to talk, the muscles in his vocal cords and things didn't work. And he tried to force it. It became much more difficult. But when he whispered, he was very, very articulate. So I'm sitting on a plane for 2.5 or 3 hours and having Muhammad Ali whispering stories in my ear. It was just, to this day, one of my favorite things. And then I got to see Muhammad again. Must have been in 97. It was at the end of 97. I was in Tokyo. New Japan flew myself and my family. They flew my entire family over to Tokyo for a New Japan New Year's Eve show. And I didn't know it. They didn't tell me when they invited me, but Muhammad Ali was going to be there as well. And this was after we became acquainted in North Korea. And you may have heard this story before, but I got to it was a Tokyo Dome, and there was a big green room there, and there was food and all kinds of things. Japanese are amazing hosts, by the way. And I walked in the green room with my son Garrett and my wife, my daughter, And there's Muhammad Ali. And he recognized me. I was very grateful for that. And we went off into a corner where it was quiet so we could talk. And I gotta be careful with this one because this one still makes me cry. I don't know why. I've told this story a bunch of times, but I still get teary-eyed when I tell it. But Muhammad Ali, he said, motioned me to come over, away from everybody else. And I'm paraphrasing this. I don't remember what his exact words were, but he asked me if I had seen the opening ceremony at the Olympics. I said, well, of course I did. I saw that. And he said, this is, God, I don't know why this happens.
No, go for it.
He said, do you think I embarrassed myself? Because you could tell the Parkinson's was really a challenge for him as he was holding the torch. And it just crushed me that he would even think that. And I told him that. I said, Muhammad, no. I said, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I mean, you're an Olympic champion and you've accomplished so much, and there's nobody in the world that doesn't know who Muhammad Ali was, and you have so much respect. But in his mind, because I think in his mind he was still the Muhammad Ali before Parkinson's. Mm-hmm. And when he saw himself on television, I think he was disappointed, and I did everything I could to assure him that he had nothing to be embarrassed about. It was a touching thing to see on television. And then to have that conversation with him is just extraordinary. Again, one of the things I'm most grateful for.
And it's crazy because all of the things that you had to go through over the years, the trials and tribulations pro wrestling kind of presented you and your family and your life. It kind of percolated in all forms. But it's those moments, right? Those moments that make it all worth it.
And the other moment on that particular trip was after, everything, Muhammad and I, we finished our conversation. That conversation probably only lasted about 3 or 5 minutes, because there was a lot of other people that wanted Muhammad's attention and photographs and pictures and stuff. And about an hour later, my son Garrett was with me. And at the time he might've been, 14, I guess. And he was there with me. And Muhammad Ali called him over. And I looked over, and I was on the other side of the room, and I looked over, and there's Muhammad Ali talking to my son, right? And I couldn't hear anything because I was so far away. And I could just see the look of Garrett, and Garrett didn't have the same appreciation for Muhammad Ali as I did. I mean, I grew up. I listened to his fights on the radio with my dad back in the early 60s when he first broke onto the scene. I remember listening to his fight with Sonny Liston with my father in Detroit. It wasn't on television. You could only hear it on the radio, right?
Right.
God, I'm really dating myself. I feel so old right now. Back in the day. But Garrett didn't have the same appreciation, really. Right. I mean, he knew who Muhammad Ali was, but he didn't really know who Muhammad Ali was, right?
Right.
I looked over, and Garrett's laughing his ass off, and I'm chuckling, smiling, smile from ear to ear. And as I'm walking over there, because I wanted to get in on it. This is what I wanted to do. I look over, and Muhammad's giving Garrett a big hug. And Muhammad Ali had a photographer with him that I got to know on the trip to Korea because he was there too. His name was Howard Bingham. I think there were 2 photographers that really were with Muhammad during the majority of his career. I can't remember the name of the first one. I'm embarrassed. But the other one was, God, I just said his name. I just spaced. Howard Bingham. And I looked over at Howard, and Howard's taking a picture of Muhammad Ali giving my son a big hug. And unfortunately, I lost touch with Howard. He has since passed away, but I am in contact. Well, not in regular contact, but I know how to get in contact with Howard's son because I met him in Korea as well. But I got to get that picture someday. That picture would be priceless. But to see Muhammad Ali, I know what he was talking about. Garrett told me afterwards. But to look over and see Muhammad Ali laughing and joking with my 14-year-old kid and then giving him a big hug was just like, does it get better than that? I don't know.
And a nice full circle moment because you're listening with your dad to his fights, on the radio. And then here you are with your son and actually meeting the guy.
Yeah. And I found out afterwards that Muhammad Ali wanted to know how many girlfriends my son had. That's what my son was laughing about.
Oh, that strapping young lad, Garrett, man. Even at 14. Right on. Kudos, man.
I think he
Uh,
was pretty. I think he was pretty. I think Garrett was pretty embarrassed. He at 14, he still wasn't. He wasn't into girls yet, but he was probably thinking about it. But that's that's what Muhammad wanted to know. How many girlfriends you got, young man? You must have all the girls chasing you. Of course, Garrett was embarrassed, but he laughed about it. That's just cool as hell.
yeah, hell yes, it is. Hell yes. Mick Mackle says, ever since Eric went on stories with Briscoe and Bradshaw, they have rocketed to number 3. So they have you to thank for their success, right? Jerry Briscoe and Bradshaw, right?
I'll be sure to remind him of that next time I see him.
Well, next time, make sure that they don't, steal Christy Olsen from us, right?
Then I'll be hot. I just saw JBL this week in New York. Where was I? In Albany, New York. And I saw JBL. I saw him in wherever we were at the big show. I can't remember. I've been in so many cities in the last 10 days. I can't remember where I was. But wherever the big event was, I think it was in New York.
Right.
I saw JBL there and got to chat with him a little bit. Got to chat with him again in Albany. But yeah, if he takes Christie, I'll be hot.
Yeah. So again, what he should have been doing in New York is alms bearing, because now they're number 3.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
I gave him the rub. I do that every once in a while.
Just saying, doing the honors.
Gotta help a friend out.
Yes. Now, speaking of 3, Julian Smith wants to know, Uncle Eric, which of the 3 AWA talent do you think would fit well in today's wrestling scene?
Oh, well, so many of them did transition to the WWF. You look at Kurt Hennig, you look at Scott Hall.
Yes.
While they didn't, Scott didn't necessarily start with the AWA. That's kind of where he made his bones.
Right.
Obviously, Hulk Hogan. Hulk will tell you, if you had a chance to talk to him about it in depth, that Hulk Hogan started becoming a thing, before he got to AWA.
Right.
But Hulk didn't really find his character until he got to AWA. And Hulk will attribute much of learning how to be Hulk Hogan to Vern Gagne. So many of the top stars in the AWA did transition to WWF back in the 80s. But I think, Kurt Hennig would still, I think if you could get Kurt, when he was in his 30s and drop him off into AEW or WWE today, he'd still be a top star.
Mm-hmm.
Who are some of my other really big favorites there that didn't really transition out? I don't know. It's hard to say because so many of them did.
Yeah.
But I think guys that had the technical skill and the interview skills that so many of them learned in the AWA, Sergeant Slaughter, so many of them really learned how to be their characters in the AWA that I think many of them today could probably transition and hold up if they weren't 75 years old.
This is true, but glad that Scott didn't take the Starship Coyote moniker with him wherever else he went after, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And I mean, I'm gonna do a volley here in terms of my pick, Billy Robinson, right? Because especially you have a Billy Robinson pupil in Shayna Baszler, right? In the WWE, you've got Barnett, you've got Kazushi Sakuraba, so it permeated even into MMA, So Billy Robinson is the guy that I feel would do well. When I see, like you mentioned, William Regal, guys now that AEW has like a Daniel Garcia, that's the mat-based style that I think would work well in any era.
Agreed.
Alex Ramirez says, there is a quote that has always stuck out to me and to use it from time to time, and that's controversy creates cash. A wise man once said that, right?
Yeah. And he got around to writing a book with that title. But it's true. Especially now when we're surrounded by controversy. TMZ is basically controversy, right? Politics is controversy. You're just overwhelmed with it. And it just seems like everywhere you go, people use some form of controversy or another to either make their point or to get awareness for whatever they're doing or their cause, or to use it for publicity. It's like, it's just cheap. It's like today's version of cheap heat.
Yeah.
Need attention? Go do something silly.
Mm-hmm.
You'll get 500,000 people following you.
That's kind of it. But we've always been in society kind of like Gonzo, right? Where, Jesus, the story about Washington Irving and Paul Revere, right? Like Paul Revere didn't go the full length of the entire seaboard. It was a guy named Nathaniel Bissell, but it didn't work out for what Washington Irving was trying to follow up Sleepy Hollow with. So they just went, okay, let's do that. So it's kind of weird. We've always been that way, but it's never been more magnified, especially with like social media and gossip journalism, right? Gone are the hard copies and inside editions and what have you, and now we've got TMZ or just people just shooting stuff on their phone.
And now mainstream news, they call it news. It's not really news anymore. I think what mainstream news has done is they looked at TMZ and went, wow, we got to do that. We're going to use the TMZ format and call it news. And it's actually depressing, to be honest. The truth gets lost in the desire to get attention. So it gets frustrating. Try not to think about it.
No, that's why we have wrestling. But then when it permeates to wrestling, then it feels like, oh, what are we doing? It's
starting to happen, isn't it? We're starting to see that today.
Yeah.
It's like that's where the heat comes from. The art of getting heat in the ring and getting heat with story and hooking people with what you're doing on television is become lost to social media. And now we're seeing it when it's done well. I mean, look at what's going on with Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair right now.
Mm-hmm.
I've been following it and Becky Lynch, what was it? 2000 and must have been early 2019 because I wasn't following WWE very closely at all in early 2019. But I'd drop in every now and then, like I do today, really.
Right.
But I'd follow things on social media, and I kept seeing these tweets from Becky Lynch. Wow, this woman has it. She knows how to use her social media, and her character was really born, I think, because of the way she so artfully used her social media. And now I'm seeing this conflict between Becky and Charlotte, and I'm asking myself, having been in the business for 30 years, and I know Becky a little bit, and I know Charlotte quite a bit. I've known her since she was a kid, and I can't tell if what they're doing in social media is real or not, which is what's so beautiful when professional wrestling is done well. When you don't know if the heat is real or if it's just scripted, that's when you got me hooked. And I'm hooked on Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair. I can't wait to see the pay-per-view because I'm not sure if it's real or not. And I got to watch the match to find out. It's awesome.
I agree. And that's when you can blur the lines and, kind of kayfabe everyone, and whether it's a shoot or, an angle they're trying to work, it's working. It's got people talking.
Well, if it's orchestrated, then I think it's probably one of the best quote unquote angles and storylines that I've seen done in a long, long time, especially because of the way they've used social media. It's all been done on social media, and it's going to play out on television, which I think is really, really, I hope it's a work. I mean, I hope it's orchestrated, because if it is, it's brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's real, it's still going to work, but
yeah,
it's not quite as artful if it's real.
No, absolutely. Now, speaking of, realistic stuff in pro wrestling, Rocky wants to know, my friend John Riggs wanted me to ask you, how realistic is Shawn Michaels' super kick?
You already know how I'm going to answer that, man. You're asking a question that you already know the answer to. That is, I could hold a raw egg between my teeth, let him kick me in the mouth, and he wouldn't crack that egg. That's how real that kick is.
You say that, right? And I have a friend, Chris Curtis, the Action Man, who just entered the UFC. But when he was on Dana White's Contender Series, the opening stanza of the fight, I think he punches his opponent's forehead and cracks his arm or what have you. He ends up KOing his opponent with a super kick.
No. there's Shawn Michaels kick, and
Right.
then there's what's called a side kick, a
Yes.
standing side kick to the. Now, if you have the ability to technically deliver a standing side kick to your opponent, it is absolutely devastating. But if you watch somebody that really knows how to throw a legitimate side kick, it's not even called a super kick, it's called a side kick.
Sidekick.
But if you watch somebody that legitimately knows how to throw a side kick, they're not throwing all of their weight in the opposite direction of their opponent. Their head's not like 4 inches off the mat, right? You stand upright as straight as you can, and you want to drive your hip forward into that kick to get the maximum amount of power. You don't lean away from it.
Right.
It's the same thing as like if you're going to punch somebody in the head, you know, if you're going to throw a right cross, you don't lean back when you throw the right cross. You put your hips into the right cross. That's where the power is generated from. And the Shawn Michaels super kick, all of the power, all of his weight was falling backwards while the kick was going out. You know, and that's why I said you couldn't crack an egg if I was holding it in my teeth with the Shawn Michaels kick. Now, I used to train with a guy when I was doing martial arts with a guy by the name of John Longstreet. John went on to become a fairly successful kickboxer. This was long before UFC. And John, he was physically, he was a freak. He was so flexible, but yet so strong. A lot of guys who were really strong weren't very flexible, and guys who were really flexible weren't really all that strong. John was one of those freaks of nature that was just genetically gifted. He was incredibly flexible and amazingly strong. And he could literally, you could put a book on his head and he could stand up. He would pick up and side kick you in the head, and the book would not fall off his head. He had that much flexibility and control over his kick. Now, if John were, and I've been kicked in the head by John, side kicked in the head by John. It was not good at all. You know, and that was with a big headgear on and everything to, you know, to kind of save me. But no, a side kick, a well-executed, legitimate side kick is one of the most devastating kicks you'll ever see. But that's not what Shawn Michaels was doing.
Facts. Mick Mack says, I need a Mucker Father shirt, which...
That's Mucker Father. That's a word I use because I try not to swear as much as I do. Sometimes when I get really excited, want to emphasize a point, sometimes I get a little bit... I go a little too far. So I try to mix it up a little bit. And Mucker Father is just something that I came up with one day in an interview. But yeah, that's a Conrad Thompson request, brother. I got nothing to do with T-shirts.
So go ahead and flood Conrad Thompson's.
Yeah, Dave Silver. Yeah, probably go to Dave Silva.
Dave Silva?
Yeah, go to Dave Silva.
All right, that works. Dudes at Ringside Podcast says, what's going on, Woods and Mr. Bischoff? And it was the big event in Queens.
That's where it was. It was a great event. It was really a ton of people there. Oh,
in terms of, they're pretty much synonymous in the Northeast over the last decade, maybe more, of just bringing some of the biggest luminaries in pro wrestling, you know, for fans. And they were even able to do like a virtual signing over the pandemic. So ways to kind of keep everyone entertained in terms of fan base, but also you guys and gals that have basically paved the road for the wrestling business. So shout out to the big event.
Yeah, Ric Flair was there, DDP was there, Ron Simmons was there, JBL, who I mentioned. God, I'm sure there was a lot of other really big names there. Once I walked in about 15 minutes before they opened the doors, and everybody, we were all kind of spread out at our own tables and things. And once they opened the doors, it was just armpit to armpit, man. You could hardly get through it. And I didn't get a chance to say hi to Scott Norton was there. I didn't even get a chance to say hi to Scott. There were a lot of people there that I didn't even get a chance to say hello to, but a few that I did, like JBL and Ron Simmons and Ric Flair, obviously. Rick had the biggest crowd. I mean, Ric Flair walked in about 2 minutes before the doors opened, and for the next 2 hours, he basically had a line going all the way around the room. Just fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really cool thing leading into one of the newest shows to the ad-free shows network is him and Mark Madden. That's cool, right?
Yeah, it's we'll see how that goes, man. That's going to be a volatile show. You know, Mark is I really, really respect Mark because he just pulls no punches. And he's an extremely intelligent guy. I think he's got an IQ of like 160 or 170, legit. I mean, he's a really, really smart guy, but he's just, he just lays it out the way he feels it. And Rick has a tendency to do that too. So I don't know, man. I think, privately we're taking bets to see how long that show lasts.
There you go.
You got two really strong personalities in Mark and Rick. So sometimes that works really well and sometimes not so much, but we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. We will see. Chris Cross says, bro, a huge fan of Mr. Bischoff. Loved you since the NWO days. Yeah.
That was the peak of my career. Trust me. It was fun.
I mean, a WWE Hall of Fame induction. That's pretty cool too, right?
No, and I shouldn't say that because there were so many high spots for me, when I look back. And certainly NWO is, because it's had such an impact, it seems to be what I'm most associated with. But, the Chuck and Billy wedding in WWE when I dressed up as the old man and, working with Stone Cold Steve Austin, in Montreal. I mean, there's been some really, really special moments that I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, no, and again, thank you for the memories. It's amazing, and it's stuff that is still being permeated with 83 weeks and after 83 weeks, or we get to relive those, kind of infamous, but also of, times of affinity in your time in the wrestling business.
Yeah, it's fun to go back. That's one of the reasons I like doing the podcast so much. Is it forces me to go back and look at things from 20 and 25 years ago or longer, because that's not my nature. I don't go back. I don't even go back and look at old pictures, other than my kids.
Right.
But when I have to do a show and I'm, recapping or reviewing a show from 1997, I've got to go back and watch it to remind myself what I did. And it's so cool because it's half the time I go back and review those shows, I haven't seen those shows since I produced them. So it's like it's brand new again.
Yeah. Mick Mac says, just Wahoo McDaniel. Now, you mentioned shows. Wahoo McDaniel, one of my favorite early when I started watching WCW, my favorite, tape to rent, because we couldn't afford the pay-per-views, but tape to rent at the Blockbuster or Hollywood Video was Slamboree, where I got to see a Wahoo McDaniel or Luthez or Thunderbolt Patterson, people who I would see in the aftermags, kind of a retro deal. But I got to see a lot of these guys and, these luminaries in person. So what are your memories of Slamboree? Was that a dusty kind of creation?
Yeah, it was really dusty. And Sharon Sadello was instrumental in that as well. But yeah, that was dusty. And for me, the one standout, because by that time, I was friends with Vern and so getting to see Vern again was cool, but it wasn't like it was the first time I'd ever seen Vern. We had become friends in the AWA and did a lot of things outside of wrestling together. And we were as much friends as employer, but I had never met Mad Dog Vachon. Mad Dog Vachon had gotten out of wrestling before I went to work for Vern Gagne. So I never met Mad Dog. I'd watched him as a young kid, and Mad Dog Vachon was at Slamboree. Mm-hmm. And by that time, he had gotten hit by a car, I think, and lost his lower leg.
Right.
And I remember going back to the dressing room, and after the show was over, and all the older guys were, Nick Bockwinkel was there, and Vern, and Mad Dog Vachon, and Wahoo, and Thunderbolt. Everybody that was the legends, if you will, were all backstage. And, of course, I couldn't wait to go back and hang out with Wahoo because I got to be pretty good friends with Wahoo as well. And I go back there and there's Mad Dog Vachon. I'm going, wow, there he is. I never met him before. I was kind of like fanboying out over Mad Dog. And he's drinking a beer and telling a story or whatever they were doing. As I'm watching him, Mad Dog takes off his fake leg and sits it down next to him, pours a beer in it, chugged a beer out of his leg. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. That's my memory of Slamboree.
That's not too different. There's a gentleman in the UFC named Tai Tuivasa, and he's from the South Pacific, but he does a shoey where he likes to spit in somebody's shoe, pour beer in and then drink it. It's nothing. Yeah, it's queasy. It's weird.
Yeah, that's a little cringy, but whatever. Hey,
We're talking about it today, so there's that, right? Vince Moore wants to know. Here's a question: does Mr. Bischoff feel that he undersold the links between wrestling and the modern media culture when he gave his TED talk?
undersold it? I don't think so. I had 18 minutes. That's the thing about a TED talk. It was either 18 or 20. I don't remember what it was, but there was a time limit because I had a clock, right in front of me. And I had a couple main bullet points that I wanted to get in because I improvised that whole thing. It's a long story behind that, but I had a whole thing formatted out and memorized and all that. And then I lost it on the plane the night before. So I just went, hell with it. I'm just going to wing it, and went into the whole media wrestling thing. And I don't think I undersold it. You got to know your audience a little bit. And the audience for a TED talk is a little different than the audience for wrestling.
Right.
So I had to kind of balance that a little bit. If I undersold it, I wish I wouldn't have, but I don't think I did. I think I made my point. I know I made my point because there was actually a journalist in the audience he was a newspaper writer in Chicago, and he came up to me afterwards, and he was pissed because I was basically calling out the media for just being, sensationalists and not really being balanced and just being essentially the professional wrestling version of journalism. And he took so much offense to it. So I think I might have, at least I made my point with him.
Yeah. All it takes is one. All it takes is one. In terms of Fight Life Nation has a question. He says, if the internet was as a big a thing in 96 as it is now, would you have been able to create as much of a surprise? And do you think you could do what you did in 94 to 98 now?
Yeah, I do. Look, it would have been harder, and you would have needed more cooperation with the talent. Because a lot of times talent just can't help. And sometimes it was just excitement, enthusiasm. They tell somebody they think they can trust what they're going to be doing, and that person decides to tell somebody else, and then before you know it, it's out there. But I think with a little more care and awareness of how easy it is to get things out, but there's no reason why you can't keep secrets and you can't keep surprises today. And if people blame it on social media, it's just because they're lazy and they're not trying hard enough.
There you go. I don't disagree with you there. And Eddie Torres says this is legendary. Would love to have a chat with Bischoff one-on-one sometime. I don't know. That could happen. And he had so many moments that have been amazing. Literally a part of my childhood, says Chris Cross.
And so, it's always, I hear that like this weekend going to these events, and I have people say things like that to me. And when they're 40 and 45 years old and they walk up to me and tell me that I was part of their childhood, it was like, God dang, do you have to tell me that? I get it. And it's a compliment. And I know they mean it in the best possible way, but it's like, I'm looking at this 45-year-old guy who's telling me that I was, part of his childhood. God almighty. Oh, I am getting old.
Well,
but it's always good to hear.
Yeah, and especially at a time where, obviously people's attention spans can be kind of fickle in terms of their entertainment and what have you. The fact that you made such an impression, right? You left a legacy. Your legacy kind of writes itself in terms of your impact on the culture. So, yeah, man. I would take it.
Oh, and I do. Don't get me wrong. It's just, I'm vain. I don't want to get old. So when I'm reminded, it was like, oh, okay, cool. I'll have a 16-year-old kid come up to me and go, oh man, I love the NWO. I love when you did this. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, your parents weren't even street legal when I was doing that stuff. How could you? But that, the Peacock Network or WWE Network, whatever you want to call it. all that stuff is still out there. And I'm really grateful for that, because guys like me and Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and, you go to these like big event, man, I saw more NWO shirts there than I saw anything else, and that's because it's still available. It's still out there. It's evergreen, it still exists.
Hopefully that evergreen, goes into your bank account, because I would think that you would
No,
get
it
some.
doesn't. It doesn't. Pisses me off, but no.
Yes, we got a couple more. Let's see. Let's see. Let's go. And I'm only 30, and he remembers you, says Chris Kloss. Chris
Oh,
Cross, I'm
thanks,
sorry.
Chris. Thanks a lot,
Yeah,
bro.
100%.
Thanks. I was just getting my old man hangover from hearing that all weekend long, and here it is. I'm sitting in my own house, and somebody else makes me feel low, but that's okay. I love it. Thank you.
Rocky Nelson says, my favorite memory of you is when Nitro was in his hometown of Yakima, Washington. You were in the ring and you said, "This town sucks so bad that I have to take a shuttle to the SeaTac airport just to get to the next show." Do you remember that promo?
Nope. Can't say as I do, but that sounds like something I would have said.
There you go. Right on. Jason Thompson says, Eric, what are the pros and cons of the current wrestling product in your estimation?
That's an easy one. I think the pros is, without question, the amazing athleticism and just how much the dynamics of the presentation inside of the ring have evolved over the last 20 years. And I credit a lot of that to the influence of the cruiserweight and the luchadors and the Japanese influence on the product. That's the pro. I think the con is that we've become too reliant upon the in-ring presentation of the product, and we've de-emphasized storytelling and character. And it's a weird balance. I think you need to have both. But I think because everybody, and a lot of this has to do with social media, and because the smallest percentage of the audience makes the largest percentage of the noise, right? So you've got a really, really hardcore fan base that really appreciates that incredible athleticism, and they're willing to dismiss the lack of story and lack of character development, or they settle for what they think is great story. It isn't really great story anymore, but they like to pretend it is, or at least they think it is, because they don't remember, or they don't care anymore, because they're just so much into that high flying, death defying, acrobatic style, which to me is like watching, and I don't want to make this sound too critical, but he asked, for me personally, because of my subjective tastes, going back to Billy Robinson and Nick Bockwinkel and that style of wrestling, when I watch what I watch today and I see the emphasis on the athleticism, it's amazing to me. The athleticism is amazing. What people are able to do with their bodies is amazing to me. But it's a little bit like watching gymnastics floor exercise. That's amazing too. And when the Olympics come around, it's one of my favorite things to watch during the Olympics is gymnastic floor exercise.
Right.
But it's not the same. It's ooh, wow, I can't believe they did that, or I can't believe somebody could actually do that physically. But I don't like that in wrestling as much. I really want to see, like the Charlotte Flair, Becky Lynch, whether it's real or Memorex, I don't know. But the fact that I don't know is what makes me excited about it, because that, by default or by design, is story. It's conflict. There are two strong characters with a conflict. And now coming up at the pay-per-view, there are stakes. Conflict and stakes create story. And that's what attracts me. And of course, they're going to have a great match because they're both phenomenal performers. But they're phenomenal performers with a great story and great stakes. And that's what I love the most. And I think the overemphasis on athleticism and presentation and the de-emphasis by default on story and character is the con that kind of disappoints me sometimes.
No, absolutely. And none more evident than your ability to tell stories in 83 weeks that, WCW kicked Vince McMahon's ass, which Pius Ino Lobo says, thank you for the Monday Night Wars.
And thank you for watching, brother.
Yes. Now, you just recently went to the Rolling Stones concert, right?
Mhm.
And you detailed that in After 83 Weeks. But I mean, in terms of, you talked about storytelling, right? And long term, or just the ability to capture an audience. The Rolling Stones haven't recorded an album in I don't know how long. I think each of them have solo projects and what have you. Mick's got solo project and what have you, but they can still fill arenas, right? Well into their late 70s, early 80s, depending on which member you're talking about, and really capture the imagination. Is that a lot of what you're talking about in terms of storytelling? And what can this current generation learn from bands like the Stones that are still going to this day?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I was thinking about that while I was in the arena because I was looking around, and I would say I was probably the median age. I mean, there were definitely people there older than me, and there were a lot of people there younger than me. I saw plenty of guys, girls in their 30s, 20s. Um, but I would say the median age is probably 50 to 60, maybe. And I think most everybody there that were in that demo, my demo, were just like me, man. I remember the first Rolling Stone song I remember was "I Can't Get No or Satisfaction." And here's a little known fact: I've never talked about this before because it's actually kind of embarrassing. But fortunately, there were no phones back then, and no mobile phones, and no way to take pictures of it. But I used to have a band when I was a kid, and our guitarist, his name was Ricky Reno, and Tony Passarelli was the drummer, and I was the lead singer. I couldn't play an instrument, but I had a tambourine like the Monkees because the Monkees
Yeah.
were out back then. That was the only thing I could play was a freaking tambourine. Um, and we used to play that song. I can't get no satisfaction. I still remember the lyrics to this day. But I remember listening to the Rolling Stones, man, in 1965 when I was in the fifth grade. And when I found out they were coming to Minneapolis, I was like, I'd never seen them before at concert. So it's like, this is a part of my life. This is my childhood and into my teens and my 20s and my 30s and my 40s. And I've always been a Rolling Stones fan. And just to have the ability to go and see them perform live, I had to do that. That was a serious bucket list item. And I was so grateful for it. And what's even more amazing is they were so good. Like I feel, Fleetwood Mac is well, actually Stevie Nicks, and whether she's solo or with Fleetwood Mac doesn't matter to me. But I went to see Fleetwood Mac, and same thing. But as much as I love Stevie Nicks, and I do, I actually have a Stevie Nicks hall pass. That was part of the condition of my wife and I getting married because she knew, I had this thing with Stevie Nicks. So I said, well, okay, we're going to get married and all that, but we got to get this out of the way right off the bat. I need a hall pass for Stevie Nicks. I don't know if it's ever going to happen. It probably never will, but if it does, I need to be upfront about that. And well, because she knew it would never happen. So, sure, whatever. So yeah, I love Stevie Nicks, but as much as I love Stevie, there are certain songs she just can't sing anymore. There's certain notes she just can't hit the way she did when she was in her 20s and 30s and 40s.
Right.
Mick Jagger is as good today as he was in 1967 or 1970. He is just an amazing, amazing performer. So if you have a chance to see him, I think the tour, if it's not over yet, it will be soon. I think it was only 11 cities or 15 cities. It wasn't a big tour.
Right.
But man, if you get a chance to see him, you owe it to yourself, even if you're not a Rolling Stones fan, because the show itself is just, the production of the show is phenomenal.
No, 100%. I guess we'll do this a TNA question, but this isn't one of the best times. But what did you tell Jeff Hardy on the night that he was clearly in the not best of shape to wrestle?
Take Sting's finish and get the fuck out of the ring.
There you go. There you go. And in terms of ending it on a high note, Rocky Nelson says, "It took everything in my power not to mark out during this live session. Thank you for all that you've done for this business," which I echo, and I believe everyone in the comment section and beyond echo the sentiments of Rocky Nelson. So, Eric, thank you for doing this. Thank you for everything that you've done in the business and what you still continue to do on after 83 weeks and 83 weeks.
Thank you, buddy. And thanks for being a part of it. I love doing after 83 weeks. It's so fun for me. It's kind of it's a little bit of an outlet for me because it's just, I don't take it seriously. Nobody takes me seriously. And we just get to have fun and laugh. And there's times throughout the week when I really look forward to just having fun and laughing. And after 83 weeks is my opportunity to do that. So thank you for being a part of that.
I appreciate it. It's one of the great joys of my life and career thus far, and just keep it rocking. And shout out to Steve Kaufman, George Hermosa, and Christy Olson as well, because I don't think either of us would be here if it weren't for that. And Conrad Thompson, my goodness, Conrad Thompson.
That's the Podfather deserves all the credit. He is the center of the podcast universe as far as I'm concerned.
Excellent. Yes. And for people to reach out to you, I have linked all your social medias in the description below, in addition to the 83 weeks website. So you can get all things that is Eric Bischoff. And go ahead and subscribe to the podcast and ad-free shows if you haven't already done so. Right?
Absolutely.
Now, while they're in the midst of subscribing to stuff, right? Thank you guys for watching and watching us here at According to Woods. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and like, share, and subscribe to the According to Woods podcast on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. I mean, Eric, you're subscribed to the podcast, right?
I will, as soon as this is over.
See? So be like Eric and go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Yes. But if you don't believe me, and you don't believe Eric Bischoff, and I don't know why you wouldn't, well, here's Zeta Zhang to convince you.
Hey, this is Zeta Zhang. Make sure you subscribe to According to Woods.